final gunshot was an exclamation mark to everything that had led to this point. I released my finger from the trigger, and then it was over.
You've probably seen this image before. It's pretty funny, but as a Max Payne fan, it's also sad, because I can't do this. I can't satisfy my thirst for more with an all-new game, having already done that when I was 15. And since then, I've played every Max Payne game multiple times, beaten their highest difficulties, even went through the wealth of mods. I've gotten Max Payne 1 on my phone, Max Payne 2 on hand, and Max Payne 3 online.
Raycevick! Oh, no! Get away from me! Get away!
I've exhausted these games, and will continue to do so. But like Burnout, Halo, and F.E.A.R, it's a style of game that stopped being iterated upon. It turns out the only thing that bring back Max Payne was Max Payne. And as excited as I am for Remedy's remaster with Rockstar's riches, there's a certain cynicism to the biggest Max Payne news in years being to play Max Payne 1 and 2 again. But then I remembered there's something Max Payne related that I hadn't experienced. The clones. Total Overdose was made by a developer that produced nothing of note, released by a publisher which never released anything of note, at a time when it wasn't anything of note. In 2005, Max Payne was recent enough that its imitators were written off for what they were, imitations. Meanwhile, the next generation of consoles was just over the horizon, ones that were about to introduce millions of new players to far more influential third-person shooters. Yet, Total Overdose has managed to retain a small cult following, either for carrying the torch for Max Payne fans, or because it's crazy. Total Overdose isn't the most memorable name, but the most accurate one. Max Payne survived experimental drugs, freezing temperatures, bullets to the head, and falling down multi-story buildings, but was he ever bull-charging people into paste, fighting armies of the dead, or ramming cars into explosive towers? Max Payne 2's firefights were played to the sound of cellos and flutes. Total Overdoses are accompanied by Molotovs. Max Payne dual-wields Mac-10s. Ramiro dual-wields machine gun guitar cases from Desparado. Max Payne can shoot dodge. Ramiro can shoot dodge, flip off walls, bounce off walls, do a 180 shoot dodge, and rewind time itself. And if that wasn't enough, he's given a combo meter that's refilled per kill, granting bonus health and power-ups every 3 kills. And if that wasn't enough, these combos are attached to a scoring system that's tallied at the end of each mission, granting further bonuses to weapons in your character. And if that wasn't enough, there's more of these bonuses to be found within an open world. And there's an open world, one with side missions, vehicles, character progression, bonus points, and multiple zones. Yeah, there's a lot going on here. So, I'm just going to ask the question, do these things improve the game? No. Forcing you to drive vehicles with the physics of Tony Hawk's Underground and mandatory side missions doesn't improve a game about shooting enemies in bullet time, something that nobody could have guessed. Let's run these down one by one. The movement abilities. Okay, these are actually the best part. It is hard not to smile when you're gunning down an enemy one-handing an AK upside down, and being able to 180 at any time is genuinely useful in a game where enemies are constantly swarming you from all angles, while also in keeping with the game's inspirations. It's something I would like to have in a Max Payne game. Really, the problem with these moves isn't that they're useless, it's the environments rarely facilitate them over a basic shoot dodge. Half the time I bounced off the wall, it was an accident, while the other half was pressing the button combo precisely, only to find out that particular wall wasn't compatible. So this footage has been every time I used the movement abilities. I might have even had to record some extra just now, because the rest of my playthrough is just the shoot dodge, while playing on the hardest difficulty. One might have assumed this game's easy because of the auto-aim, but actually, aiming's the biggest challenge of all. This circle is more meant to represent what your character's attempting to shoot while watching them miss. Now, there is some method to this madness. The developers made Total Overdose primarily for consoles during a time when the industry were still hiring scientists to dissect Bungie's analog controls. So rather than ask players to precisely aim with the input of a curling rock, they use auto-aim. And to stop players from picking off everyone from the moon, all guns are given a low range to funnel you into enemies. But all the logical explanations in the world cannot address the fact that seeing a character aim worse than you can is really annoying. If less so than headshots that require you to time a trigger pull perfectly, or else the headshot is cancelled, and I swear to God this thing is bugged. At first I thought lock-on cancelling at different rates might have had to do with playing the game on PC and the game not accounting for high frame rates, kind of like Max Payne, but it's the same on PS2. So it's often best just to stumble towards enemies tapping the fire button, which makes all the extra things Ramiro can do essentially worthless. I'd say the same for the game's loco moves, but that would be a lie. Using El Mariachi on every single boss fight was a big time saver, and the golden gun was nice to have when I needed Ramiro to actually hit something. I didn't even have to worry about spamming these abilities because of the game's multiplier. Whenever you chain together a set number of kills, you're rewarded with loco moves, which given the game's difficulty, meant I almost always had 2 tokens for each of the 7 power-ups. There's not even anything to stop you from using them back to back. It would also be a lie to say this isn't fun, in the same way modding an AR to fire rockets is fun. And it also presents a bit of a catch-22. If you spam these, it becomes even easier than it already is. But if you ignore them as I did, it protracts every firefight that you're rarely in danger of losing. Oh, and that lack of difficulty extends to the score tally. Not that the rewards from it are so grand, I ever strive for the high ratings I got. The game's ease doesn't stem from not having enough dual-wielding weapons or extra bullet time and health bonuses. Not to mention that in a game that's so short, I question its use. 4 hours into Max Payne, I'm dual-wielding MAC-10s because enemies are dropping it in later levels. 4 hours into Total Overdose, I'm dual-wielding MAC-10s because I leveled up my character. I'm not saying it's worse, I'm asking how it's better. What's the difference here, apart from the developer not being in complete control of when I have these bullet hoses during the campaign? Okay, not doing so hot then. The open world? It sucks. Really bad. It's ugly, small, empty, and my legs are longer than this game's draw distance. Then again, that also describes Saints Row 2, and that's one of my favorite games. In fact, it also, like Total Overdose, requires you to complete side missions before continuing the main story. There's a big difference though. Side missions in Saints Row 2 involve spraying poo on people's houses, throwing yourself in the cars, riding ATVs in fireproof suits, and more hysterical objectives. Side missions in Total Overdose involve shooting, and driving, and shooting, and driving. I was relieved to find a mission selection menu, but it renders this open world completely useless. There's no police, no unique characters, even the side missions aren't integrated into the world. You've got to load each particular level. All that's offered are collectibles which, given the awful driving, platforming, and character progression, is hardly enticing. So, yeah, the one feature Total Overdose added that improves the core gameplay is its rewind mechanic. From Sands of Time. Like that game, it does maintain momentum. One mistake doesn't set you back. Though that's also not a compliment. It contributes to this game's lack of urgency, where even on the verge of death, I don't feel any kind of danger, for when death occurs, I'm right back up anyways, with 8 more chances available. It's why then I'm not entirely comfortable giving this mechanic a stamp of approval. It's more like a band-aid for Total Overdose's core gameplay, consisting of endless lock-on targeting inept enemies with technical difficulties through a chain of shipping containers, factories, and back alleys, with objectives separated by countries, and the biggest padding I've witnessed since Destiny 1. Take this for example. Ramiro sends a speedboat into the top of a mansion swimming pool, and just when you're torching some rich asshole's estate, there's a locked door. So you must backtrack to flip a switch and repeat the firefight, only to start descending down the man's pier where this level could have just started with the boat you had ascending up to the mansion. And it only gets more egregious. The objective in this temple is to flip a switch that sends data from a satellite that needs a switch to align it, which needs a switch to power its generator. A switch for a switch for a switch. I know the options of game writers are often limited to kill a thing, defend a thing, or press use on a thing, but Jesus Christ. If this game were a room, it'd be padded solitary. It's a 5-hour game that feels like 15, and the thought of replaying it makes me sick. That's not because it isn't interesting. In many ways, Total Overdose was actually an omen of things to come, with its open world, side missions, character progression, collectibles, and driving. There's a whole lot of action games today that very much share this framework. But unlike so many games which pave the way for others, I don't believe there's anything to pull from Total Overdose. None of its features improve core gameplay, which isn't very good in the first place. It throws 30 plates in the air, and frankly, the end result is what I'd expect from the developer of Watchmen The End is Nigh. There's really only 2 things left about this game that distinguish it, which I'm not sold on. Number 1, it's crazy. I remember this game being nominated for GameSpot's Craziest Game of the Year award, and sure, it's got your character flipping off walls with dual-wield shotguns, firing from zip lines, and leaping out of moving vehicles. But not only is this pretty unremarkable in a post-Just Cause world, it's not even that remarkable for the standards of the time. Matrix Path of Neo had a fourth wall-breaking narration from 8-bit avatars of the Wachowskis explaining to the player directly why the Matrix Revolutions is now ending with a Smith made out of the Earth. And Amp 3 is, well, Amp 3. Number 2, it's, Mexican. I'm sorry, but this game's about as Mexican as I am. Blasting Molotov wearing a sombrero and every enemy screeching, "Pendejo!" isn't Mexican. It's what Mexico is to a bunch of Europeans living in Copenhagen, because that's where the game's developers were. Next game. One of Max Payne's obvious influences were Hong Kong action films. From the diving, slow motion, camera shots, and Max Payne himself name-dropping John Woo's most famous lead actor. So it only makes sense to present a Max Payne game with Chow Yun-fat himself, directed by John Woo. And that's exactly what Midway Chicago, better known today as NetherRealm, did. Just coming off of PsyOps The Mindgate Conspiracy, a game I really need to cover sometime, Midway wanted to attach their overtly talented developers with a name that could get them the attention they deserved, and just happened to have the connections to ask John Woo for assistance. The result is a game that's not just impressive for 2007, but even today. Max Payne 3's combat presentation is superb, from its bullet trails to the amount of microdestruction in its environment. So it says something that a game released when Max Payne 3 started development is even more destructive. Midway Chicago spent heaps of resources and time to modifying Unreal Engine 3 and all of their assets to react to the player's fire. Not just in triggering scripted objects like lampposts and pieces of construction, but chips in the wood walls, stacked shelves, and even concrete floors in certain stages. It's overwhelming, even to the point of causing the game's visuals to glitch on PC. Now, admittedly, I had played this game before on 360 for another video, and kind of hated it. The frame rate couldn't hold steady at 30 to save its life, and the FOV was disgustingly low. I felt like the TV was taped to my forehead. But having fixed both of those issues on PC, link in the description, it makes sense why the Xbox struggled. Midway threw everything at this game. Every level really is like the hospital shootout in Hard Boiled. There isn't a firefight without some kind of debris, dust, smoke, or particle in the air. It is fantastic. and the game actively facilitates this chaos in not just its level design, but through one of the simplest yet most notable changes this game makes to the usual third-person shooter formula. There's no reloading. Yes, there's that animation which we'll get to, but during normal play, every weapon you pick up, the pistol, shotgun, SMG, rifle, deagle, LMG, and rocket launcher don't have a reload. And it doesn't come at the cost of immersion because, look at this. Is not reloading really the most ridiculous thing going on? And guns still have limited ammo with a 2-weapon limit, so you're actively swapping between whichever tool is most useful in a given fight, while letting you hold down the trigger in the most intense fights, creating that action movie spectacle dynamically. I'm not somebody who is actively against reloading in video games, but here it was absolutely the right call, and in games like Stranglehold, it's something more designers should consider. You can have contemporary weapons that don't reload. It's not a sin. What is are QuickTime events? They're not called as such. Midway gave them the moniker standoffs, where you lean left and right to dodge bullets. It's dumb to look at, slow to play, and kills the game's entire pace every time it happens. Though the reason standoffs exist is because the game has nothing else. Everything you've seen is Stranglehold. It's the opposite of total overdose. Thankfully, there are at least a variety of objectives and locations that our previous games sorely lacked. While Stranglehold's not very impressive in its raw textures and animations, the spectacle makes up for it, and the different backdrops do present a changing atmosphere and soundscape, with you fighting out in Hong Kong back alleyways and rocky islands, along with penthouses and museums in Chicago. The most notable objective variety are things like strategically placing guitar cases of ammo before each battle, blowing up shipping boats in whatever order you choose, dodging laser grids in the middle of firefights, and best of all, fighting an army of goons while a jazz band is ordered to keep playing, which might be one of the best objectives ever put into a video game. Unfortunately, it's not enough to keep the ceaseless barrage from growing stale. It's not that there isn't any flexibility in this sandbox. The levels aren't just destructible, they're interactable, allowing you to swing across light fixtures, sliding down staircases, run up railings, and land on a moving cart controlling its direction. That last one was even a scripted set piece in Max Payne 3 that's completely dynamic here. It's also not that Stranglehold doesn't keep introducing new things. It's that the developer stretches this game harder than Quan Chi. Those weapons I mentioned earlier, that's every single one of them. And 3 of those, the golden pistol, LMG, and rocket launcher, are so rare, the game effectively tops at 4 guns: a pistol, SMG, shotgun, and rifle. The most basic firearms in a shooter. Now, that perhaps wouldn't matter as much if these weapons were more satisfying to shoot, but really, the levels do the heavy lifting in making this game fun, because the core shooting is underwhelming. Not only do the 4 guns sound kinda weak, they're also very inaccurate. Obviously, it's meant to aid the environmental destruction this team puts so much effort into. But when the game starts throwing more bullet sponge enemies at you in the latter half, rolling the dice with these automatic weapons becomes increasingly annoying, especially when the gameplay loop itself isn't evolving in an interesting way. The only tactics I developed over hours of playtime was cherishing every golden pistol to clear the worst enemies, and learning to spam this game's final distinguishing feature in gameplay, tequila bombs. A meter filled through stylish kills to power up one of 4 abilities: healing on the fly, a long-range shot, 30 seconds of unlimited ammo and invulnerability, and a spin that kills any in the vicinity. All of them are useful in the right circumstances, and the game's increasing difficulty greatly encourages their use, with Barrage being the most obvious fun. It encapsulates all of this game's strength into one 30-second romp, as does the 4th, which looks particularly goofy with a shotgun, but no more than the jazz band. The problem are these abilities, like the rest of the game, seem very one-note. where bullet time's an ability that can be used aggressively, defensively, when you're diving through the air, running along, or trying to hit that particular explosive, these powers are rigid. Healing save for the brink of death, long range takes care of snipers, barrage is to grin like a kid with fireworks, and the spin is done to skip an annoying firefight. There's not much expression, personalization, or flexibility in the tequila bombs, not like there was in Chicago's previous game. This is particularly apparent later on, where the game's method of difficulty and hard is throwing more enemies at you than can be killed in bullet time. And because there's no damage resistance when you're low at health, like there secretly is in a lot of games, an average player must rely on these bombs to win. There's also lots of annoying quirks about this game which become apparent at higher difficulties. Just like Total Overdose, enemies will spawn out of thin air, but this time due to poor scripting and placement rather than technical errors. And there's times when cutscenes are played for both entire armies and a duo, making it possible to waste a tequila bomb for a battle that doesn't exist. Also, this AI? It's not good. And this is a small thing, I know, but years ago I complained about Max Payne 3's clunky footsteps and often used it as an example for whenever I'm talking about unwieldy controls. This is the exact opposite. Tequila moves so quickly it's visually repugnant. When you're forced to adjust your movement constantly, the guns in Doom have more animated frames than your character does. I understand it's meant to give me flexibility in movement, but all it does is take me back to Alpha Protocol. All in all, Stranglehold was ahead of its time. Midway Chicago discussed all of this game's unique qualities being paired with open-ended sandbox levels, vehicles, and their publisher mandating a full multiplayer component up to 8 players. But the effort in making John Woo's spectacle interactive was so grand it absorbed the game's entire development. The sandbox levels and vehicle segments were never implemented, and the multiplayer had to stop being iterated upon mid-development to ensure its release date was met. It had to sacrifice visual fidelity, mechanical depth, variety of gameplay, and online features to recreate this one scene. And they mostly pulled it off. But now, imagine this game being made today. Imagine if this game had the fidelity, budget, and development time of Max Payne 3. Imagine this game's levels and reactivity with modern tools. It would be insane. Unfortunately, Stranglehold isn't the product of an ideal world, but the desperation of a AAA company in its final days. And at the very least, what they produced is worth playing for the attention to detail alone. The humble developer trend of this video continues with a game by Artificial Mind in Movement, now Behavior. Leading up to September 2009, the company made Happy Feet, Drake and Josh, The Golden Compass, DS, Lord of the Rings Conquest, DS, Seen It Bright Lights Big Screen, and Wet. Yeah, I don't get it either. Whether this game's the product of a company going postal after years of movie license ports or a secret passion project brewing underneath the surface, there's no information to know. All that can be known is what the Quebec developer made: a Grindhouse cosplay. Now, Grindhouse is two things: a style of low-budget theater home to exploitation films, and a 2007 double feature by Robert Rodriguez and Quentin Tarantino made as a tribute to them, with 2 exploitation films of their own, complete with sex and violence, damaged film reels, and fake intermissions.
Brought to you from your friends at the Weinstein Company.
Wet thankfully doesn't have that. But it's got almost everything else, and absolutely nails the Grindhouse aesthetic with the grainy filters, character designs, and portraits. As a concept art book, Wet succeeds with flying colors, but as an actual game, let's start with a nitpick. This is a stock sound effect that's been used for decades. It's heard in everything from American movies to open world games and hip-hop albums. This ubiquity makes it hard to take seriously, but typically games use it as a sidearm. Now, frankly, the audio in all these games aren't great, littered with pea shooters that sound more like somebody imitating a gun. But Wet goes above and beyond, not only using this sound for your primary weapon, it's the only to have decent range, high accuracy, and infinite ammo with the most useful upgrades, including an increased fire rate, meaning 90% of the game sounds like this. But wait, it gets worse. Wet soundtrack is mostly comprised of licensed music with a big emphasis on rockabilly and punk, fast-paced repetitive choruses of distorted guitars and reverb screaming. The exact thing that doesn't really mesh with... And these aren't instrumentals. You're forced to hear the same lyrics in a 5-minute battle over and over and over and over and over and over and over, making me feel like Kurt Russell in Death Proof. And my issue isn't that the music is too aggressive. My favorite band recently have been a British duo called Wargasm. Another is an American noise rock group called Whores. I love aggressive, distorted, overtly edgy music. I even enjoy many of Wet's songs in their original context, but as 30-second combat loops with infinite ammo stock sound effect guns, I'd rather hear Desync's webcam. Now, it could be part of the Grindhouse aesthetic, as the rest of this game's sound library is made up of iconic stock effects too. But considering the game's dozens of licensed songs and cast of established voice actors, it's just as likely the developers were broke. And what fuels that theory for me are the areas between these ear-bleeding arenas. There are Garry's Mod conversions with more ambience than this. There are dev rooms with more ambience than this. For annoyed by the stock sound effects as I am, I'd rather use them than have no sound at all. Yet for the environment, it is so often not the case. Whew. And all of that being just about sound sets the tone for the rest of this game's construction, with the most evident being that this game doesn't feel good at all. Max Payne 3's curling rock has been replaced with a boulder. It's yet another 2000s victim of poor aim acceleration, even more so than GoldenEye Rogue Agent, where the turning speed varies so much over the tiniest adjustments made to the analog stick, you're either over or undershooting a target. It's a style of aiming that rewards you for relying on the auto-aim that pulls you like a leash, especially when enemies are packed together. It was understandable during the early days of those men in lab coats camping outside Bungie, but by 2009, there were no more excuses. The only way a company in the PS3 era released with PS2 aiming was if they never made a shooter. Alright. That inexperience is apparent in more ways than one. During firefights, you're given a multiplier in score tally. These points net you currency to spend on upgrading weapons or unlocking abilities such as firing when climbing and swinging. Personally, I don't see the point in locking away your game's unique traits, but it's the late 2000s and skill trees are all the rage, so I don't really care that much. What's baffling is this upgrade screen comes up at the end of every firefight, even those ending the stage, meaning you'll be prompted for an upgrade, go back to the game, walk 10 feet, and be prompted for the same upgrades after a cutscene has wrapped. I didn't edit this footage. It's Resident Evil 6 levels of pacing. In fact, it might be worse because that game didn't have challenges attached to weapons which you have to complete for the story to progress. These flashbacks have nothing to do with the story. They're just training for SMGs and shotguns. They don't even have an alternate firing mode or different ammunition. The shotgun is just a shotgun, a really bad one at that, requiring upgrades to be in any way decent, which then deters you from ever touching the other weapons until you upgrade those as well, which isn't until hours into the game. Wet isn't lacking for good ideas that should work on paper. Combining Max Payne and Devil May Cry seems like a match made in heaven, but the boring sword combat combined with endless slow-motion revolvers evokes those games like this name evokes respect for women. If there's anything that should be impossible to mess up in a Max Payne clone, it's bullet time, and yet, Wet achieves this. Rather than being attached to a meter like every game, Wet attaches bullet time to Ruby's acrobatics. Whenever she's jumping, wall running, or sliding, the game slows down, built for chaining moves against enemies with no ability to react. Bullet time was already too powerful in Max Payne's sequel, so for a game to grant infinite slow motion is completely insane. Yet paradoxically, the game seems aware of its own questionable design, as levels begin to swarm you with enemies that are also bullet sponges. And you know what that means. Still, could be worse. You could be playing a bad Tomb Raider game instead. All the interviews kept calling this game an acrobatic shooter as an effort to distinguish this from the cover shooting craze. But it doesn't fit, because Wet's one of the stiffest games of its generation, with its 6th-gen animations, inability to wall run after jumping, or just have Ruby reliably grab a ledge. It can't even use the camera properly, insisting on these cinematic shots that just stop me from seeing if Ruby's going to reach the ledge, which she often doesn't. Playing discount Tomb Raider isn't variety, but as far as this game goes, that's all there is other than stationary turrets, the aforementioned challenges, and quick time events. Man, I would have really liked to have played this level like in Uncharted 2 for the PS3, or Pursuit Force for the PSP, which beyond just being dull, I also have to question development. There's a hilarious compilation of Wet's QTE failures online, and while sequences like the highway are understandably reusing assets, lots of the failures are using completely original sequences that 90% of players are never going to see, and the 10% who do will just immediately repeat that cutscene again. This trend was such a waste. And I can't call this attention to detail, because if there's anything this game lacks, it's detail. I'm not talking about the environments, although those are very dreary, but the little things. These intermissions, meant to maintain the game's aesthetic and flow, appear just infrequently enough to feel jarring every time they happen. And they don't cover up loading screens because those still exist. Every time Ruby dies, it plays this damage film reel, only to then cut to a loading screen. And being these intermissions are real drive-in ads from the 60s, an era this game has nothing to do with, they're not connected to anything. You're just playing the game, and then...
There are words men live by, words of strength.
What does it do? It doesn't mask the loading, it's not funny, it's not related to the story, it's an interruption from the action, not a break, and none of these advertisements have any connection with Wet. consistency doesn't extend to just the ads themselves, but their placement. They appear in empty hallways after cutscenes, even in firefights. And here's what this particular ad leads into. It's like they're trying to top this. This game hurts me. And I swear to God, if they gave Ruby a harmonica because Revy had one, I'm gonna lose my shit. Contrary to popular belief, a foul-mouthed, dual-wielding, mercenary tomboy with a 4-letter name starting in the letter R isn't automatically a character I like. The secret to edgy material, music, movies, anime, video games, whatever it may be, is they accomplish one of two things. They mask a deeper complexion that's even more fascinating because of their original presentation, or are so charming you can't help but smile at the absurdity. Wet is neither of these things. Ruby doesn't have a charming line of dialogue, a hilarious action, fascinating contradiction, or a deeper layer to how she presents herself. She's just a brooding gunslinger, making the impersonal nature of this game's story fall completely flat. I've wanted more franchises to be comfortable returning to complete stories about a character doing their job rather than a saga of their personal lives. But Wet's attempt at one shows how badly these stories fall without a compelling lead. The first 30 minutes of this game is...
That piece of shit has no case.
I'm playing Connect the Dots on a highway because...
That piece of shit has no case.
Riveting!
In fact, this speaks to Ruby's motivation for so many hours in the campaign that when she expresses compassion, it was jarring. This character has done nothing to establish who she is or what she enjoys, which apparently isn't even killing people based on her expression. Like, Max Payne broods because he came home to his murdered wife and infant daughter. That's a pretty good reason. I can empathize with that. But here, there's nothing to go on. She's never challenged physically or emotionally, and yet is more notable than anyone else in the cast, which tells you everything. Similar to how the game ending on a QuickTime event boss fight tells you everything. I unfortunately can't see what people see in this game. Even if I adored the soundtrack, editing, and characters, its gameplay is easily the weakest of the three here. Though when a friend who enjoyed it said that someone should remake it, I'm not entirely opposed to that. Like titles before it, Wet has all the promise of a good game. It just needed a team with the experience and resources to realize that potential, which after making this game, Artificial Mind and Movement might have learned, as it was their first real original product since 1997. Lord knows we've seen other studios make quantum leaps within a single IP. I'll say this about Ruby. Her character writing and personality is insultingly awful, but her character design is fantastic. One that could easily become as iconic as the action heroines that inspired her, if put into something more notable. The same goes for this game's combination of Max Payne, Tomb Raider, and Devil May Cry. It's ripe with potential for someone to iterate and remedy the error of this game's ways, and most importantly, be the most unique of the games we've looked at, rather than be, at best, what people called all of them back then, an imitation. Honestly, part of my lack of uploads was willing myself through these games rather than do anything else. And writing about them is even more difficult because they're so simplistic, painfully so. Core gameplay consists entirely of holding down the trigger in slow motion with only gimmicks to compensate. It's just one thing, There's no enemy variety, no notable set pieces, no memorable levels, no evolution in style of play, just an endless barrage of gunfights. And I know what everybody's thinking. I just described Max Payne. And they're correct. In the same way they're correct to say Burnout and Gran Turismo are both driving games, Call of Duty and Arma are both military shooters, and Mario and Limbo are both platformers. You know what none of these games have an equivalent of? Max's Nightmares, Mona's Funhouse, the police station, the cemetery, grandma with a shotgun, airport shootout, Matrix lobby, nightclub, character swap, the bar killing, TV shows, ragdolls, good writing, or underground kink dungeons which not only connect to the plot but is the secret catalyst to this entire franchise's origin story. Max Payne is an emotional roller coaster. It makes you feel more than one thing. You're sad for Max's grief, you're laughing at his sarcasm. You're terrified by his nightmares, you're grinning at the TV, curious about the conspiracies, intrigued by Mona, disgusted by Vinny, mocking Vinny, pitying Vinny, and going through everything regarding Vlad. Even the weakest game narratively still has a strong sense of pathos through its phenomenal voice acting and music. These games didn't have the biggest gameplay variety, but made up for it through variety of context. Total Overdose, Stranglehold, and Wet might all have more mechanics than Max Payne, but in terms of mood, they're each a one-trick pony, desperately reaching for disconnected systems to make up for a lack of emotional variety. And you don't even need to accomplish this through storytelling. Just altering the colors and changing the music goes a long way to making a sequence memorable. You don't need to have more than one thing. You don't need to be more than one thing. You just have to make the player feel more than one thing, because none of us are just one thing. As it turns out, Total Overdose and Stranglehold are on sale right now, and through my GOG link in the description, you can buy them while also supporting the channel. Speaking of which, Patreon has been overhauled, with multiple new bonuses for multiple tiers. For just $1, patrons have early access to videos as well as a following post-mortem after launch, in addition to weekly recommendations and having your name listed here. And for Discord, I've been hosting multiplayer sessions on Saturdays, where we've so far played Max Payne 3, Bioshock 2, Splinter Cell Blacklist, Driver San Francisco, Titanfall 2, Doom, Far Cry 3, and Ricochet. To those who've ever donated and continue to, thank you. My work genuinely wouldn't be possible without you assisting with the ad rev. Also, speaking of which, when will you decide that the ad revenue is better as a Pornhub creator and transition your thoughtful gaming analysis there? I've seen the comments on Pornhub. They seem to discuss gaming an awful lot there, so it might be a wise investment. What kind of animal or creature from any video game would you want as a pet? Any dog. They listen to all commands and I don't have to pick up their poop. Will you ever play a Persona game? I've always wanted to try one. It's not the systems that stop me, it's the time. Like, Jesus! Will you ever be a Persona game? No. Will you ever be a person? No. Will you? No. Will? No. W? No. Question mark? No. Upside down question mark? Sure. What is Black Lagoon? Ray, I love you. Right back at ya. Why are most of your Discord members absolute lunatics that put bread in the fridge? It's a profitable niche. Are you a hidden genius? Yes. What do you smell like? Gamer. What are your thoughts on JRPGs? They're too long. I bet these questions would not be answered. Stop, Ray! You violated the law! That's the wrong fucking guy! What's your favorite race? Car. Is Rollerdrome the next best thing in the realm of Max Payne-ish shoot? Yes! I should have played that instead of playing these!